The sound of gunfire echoed through the small town of Willow Creek as Josephine Vance clutched her leather satchel tightly to her chest and ducked behind a water trough. Her heart pounded wildly in her ears, nearly drowning out the chaos that had erupted in what should have been a peaceful afternoon in June of 1878. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had been stepping off the stagecoach, ready to begin her new life as a schoolteacher in this frontier town. Now, she was caught in the middle of what appeared to be a bank robbery gone wrong. "Stay down, madam," a deep voice commanded as a tall figure suddenly appeared beside her, his body shielding hers from potential danger. Josephine looked up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face partially hidden beneath the brim of a dusty brown hat. The stranger wore the typical attire of a cowboy, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, and a leather vest that had seen better days. "Ethan Dawson, Deputy Marshal," he introduced himself quickly, his eyes scanning the street as he drew his revolver. "You picked a mighty unfortunate day to arrive in Willow Creek." Another shot rang out, splintering wood just inches from where they crouched. Josephine flinched, a small cry escaping her lips despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I need to get you somewhere safe," Deputy Dawson said, his voice steady and reassuring despite the danger. "When I say run, you head straight for that building there." He nodded toward a sturdy-looking structure across the street with a sign that read General Store. "Don't stop for anything. Understand?" Josephine nodded, her throat too dry to form words. She had come west from Boston seeking adventure and purpose, but this was far from the dignified arrival she had imagined. Her carefully pinned chestnut hair was coming loose, her emerald green traveling dress was now dusty and wrinkled, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. "Now," the deputy commanded, rising slightly and firing 2 shots toward the bank. Gathering her courage and her skirts, Josephine ran as fast as her boots would allow. The deputy stayed close behind her, his presence oddly comforting despite having just met him. They burst through the door of the general store, startling the elderly shopkeeper who was wisely staying away from the windows. "Afternoon, Mr. Whitaker." Deputy Dawson greeted the man with remarkable calm. "Got a situation out there. Mind if the lady stays here while I handle it?" The shopkeeper nodded, gesturing toward the back of the store. "Take her to the storeroom, deputy. Safest place right now." Before Josephine could thank either man, the deputy was guiding her past shelves stocked with supplies and into a small back room filled with crates and barrels. "Stay here until I come for you," he instructed, his hand briefly touching her shoulder. "What's your name, madam?" "Josephine Vance," she replied, finally finding her voice. "I'm the new school teacher." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "The school board's been waiting for you, though I reckon they didn't expect you'd be dodging bullets on your first day." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, softening his rugged features momentarily. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Vance." With that, he was gone, closing the storeroom door firmly behind him. Josephine sank onto a wooden crate, her legs finally giving way beneath her. As the sounds of gunfire continued outside, she wondered what kind of place she had come to, and why the deputy's blue eyes seemed so hauntingly familiar. Hours later, when the chaos had subsided and the would-be bank robbers had been either captured or driven out of town, Deputy Dawson returned to the general store. Josephine had spent the time helping Mr. Whitaker organize his stock, needing something to occupy her hands and mind. "Miss Vance," the deputy called, removing his hat as he approached. "The situation's been resolved. I'd be happy to escort you to the boarding house where arrangements have been made for your lodging." In the late afternoon light streaming through the windows, Josephine could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps no more than 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and though his expression remained serious, there was a gentleness in his eyes that belied his dangerous profession. "Thank you, Deputy," she said, gathering her satchel and the few belongings that had been retrieved from the stagecoach. "I appreciate your assistance during this unexpected welcome." As they stepped outside, Josephine was struck by how quickly the town had returned to normal. People moved about their business, though many paused to stare curiously at her, the new arrival whose first hours in town had coincided with such excitement. "Don't worry," Deputy Dawson said, noticing her discomfort at the attention. "By tomorrow, someone else will have done something to get the gossips talking. Small towns have short memories for some things, and long memories for others." Josephine asked, sensing there was more to his statement. He nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Some things folks never forget, Miss Vance, but you needn't concern yourself with that. Willow Creek is a good place with good people. Today was an exception, not the rule." They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, Josephine taking in the sights of what would be her home for the foreseeable future. Willow Creek was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with businesses: the bank, the general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and various other establishments necessary for frontier life. At the far end of town stood a white-painted church, its steeple reaching toward the cloudless blue sky. "The schoolhouse is just beyond the church," Deputy Dawson explained, following her gaze. "It's not much, but the town takes pride in education. The previous teacher, Miss Harriet, she left to get married last winter. The children have been without proper schooling since then." "How many students will I have?" Josephine asked, grateful for the conversation to distract her from the lingering effects of the day's excitement. "Around 20, ranging from 5 to 16 years old. Some only come when they can be spared from ranch work." He glanced at her, assessing. "Teaching them all together will be a challenge." Josephine straightened her shoulders. "I'm not afraid of challenges, Deputy Dawson. I wouldn't have come west if I were." This drew a genuine smile from him, transforming his serious countenance entirely. "No, I don't suppose you would have." They arrived at a 2-story house with a neat front garden and a sign reading Mrs. Potter's boarding house. The deputy escorted her to the door but declined to enter when the proprietress appeared. "Mrs. Potter, this is Miss Vance, your new boarder," he said, replacing his hat. "She's had quite an introduction to our town, so perhaps some tea might be in order." The plump, gray-haired woman clucked sympathetically. "Of course, you poor dear. Come in, come in. I've got your room all prepared and supper will be ready shortly." Josephine turned to thank the deputy, but he was already backing away. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Vance, to see how you're settling in," he promised. "And don't worry, most days in Willow Creek are peaceful enough to be boring." As she watched him walk away, Josephine couldn't help but wonder if that would prove true, and why she found herself hoping her paths would cross frequently with the enigmatic Deputy Dawson. The next morning, Josephine rose with the sun, eager to explore her new surroundings in the light of day and without the threat of flying bullets. Mrs. Potter's boarding house proved to be a comfortable establishment with clean, if simple, accommodations and delicious home-cooked meals. Breakfast was served promptly at 7, and Josephine found herself sharing the table with the town's doctor, a young man named Dr. Samuel Green, and the telegraph operator, Miss Florence Miller, a spinster of indeterminate age with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. "So you're the new schoolmarm," Miss Miller said, studying Josephine over the rim of her coffee cup. From Boston, they say. What brings a city girl like you all the way out here? Before Josephine could answer, Dr. Green intervened. Now, Florence, give the poor woman a chance to eat her breakfast before the interrogation begins. It's quite all right, Josephine assured him with a smile. I came west because I wanted something different, something meaningful. There are plenty of teachers in Boston, but out here, I thought I might make a real difference. HMPH, Miss Miller snorted, though not unkindly. Well, those children certainly need someone to knock some learning into them. Wild as jackrabbits, the lot of them. Don't let Florence scare you, Mrs. Potter said, refilling Josephine's coffee cup. They're good children, just high-spirited, and they've been without proper guidance since Miss Harriet left. I'm looking forward to meeting them, Josephine said truthfully. When can I see the schoolhouse? Mayor Wilson has the keys, Dr. Green informed her. But I believe Deputy Dawson was planning to escort you there this morning. Something about wanting to ensure your safety after yesterday's excitement. Josephine felt a flutter of anticipation at the mention of the deputy, which she quickly suppressed. That's very considerate of him. Miss Miller's shrewd eyes didn't miss the slight color that rose to Josephine's cheeks. Ethan Dawson is one of the few decent men in this town, she declared. Too serious for his own good, but reliable as sunrise. And single, Mrs. Potter added with a meaningful look at Josephine, though not for lack of interest from the local ladies. I'm here to teach, not to find a husband, Josephine stated firmly, though she couldn't deny a certain curiosity about the deputy's unattached status. A man of his character and appearance would surely have his pick of admirers. Dr. Green chuckled. You'll soon find that in a town this size, everyone takes an interest in everyone else's business, particularly when it comes to matters of the heart. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Mrs. Potter hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Deputy Dawson in tow. He had exchanged his dusty clothes from the previous day for a clean shirt and vest, though he still wore his gun belt, a necessary accessory for his profession, Josephine supposed. Good morning, Miss Vance, he greeted her, tipping his hat. I hope you slept well despite yesterday's events. Quite well, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. She had chosen a simple blue dress for her first official day in town, with her hair neatly arranged in a practical style suitable for a schoolteacher. Deputy Dawson was just telling me that the mayor's waiting at the schoolhouse to give you the grand tour, Mrs. Potter explained. Josephine quickly finished her coffee and excused herself from the table. Then we shouldn't keep him waiting. Outside, the morning sun bathed Willow Creek in golden light, transforming the dusty frontier town into something almost picturesque. Several townsfolk nodded greetings as Josephine and the deputy walked side by side down the main street, their curious gazes following the pair. I'm afraid you've become something of a local celebrity, Deputy Dawson commented, seeming amused by the attention. It's not every day a new schoolteacher arrives in the midst of a shootout. I had hoped to make a more dignified first impression, Josephine admitted ruefully. If it's any consolation, you handled yourself well. Many newcomers would have been hysterical in such circumstances. The unexpected compliment pleased her. My father always said that panic never improved a situation. He was a ship's captain, so he knew something about maintaining composure in a crisis. A wise man, the deputy observed. Is that why you came west? The spirit of adventure from your father? Josephine considered the question. Partly, I suppose. After he died last year, there seemed little reason to remain in Boston. My mother passed when I was young, and I have no siblings. Teaching has always been my calling, but I wanted to go somewhere I was truly needed. I'm sorry about your father, he said quietly. And Willow Creek certainly needs you. Education isn't always prioritized in frontier towns, but the families here value learning. Some of the ranch children ride 10 miles each way to attend school. They pass the church, a simple white clapboard building with a steeple that seemed to pierce the blue sky. Beyond it stood the schoolhouse, smaller than the one Josephine had taught in back east, but solidly built, with a bell tower and a flagpole out front. Mayor Wilson, a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers, waited on the schoolhouse steps. He greeted Josephine effusively, pumping her hand with both of his. "Miss Vance, we are absolutely delighted to have you here. When we received your letter expressing interest in the position, the town council was most impressed with your qualifications. Harvard education, 5 years teaching experience. Why, you're overqualified for our humble school." "I assure you, Mayor Wilson, I'm exactly where I want to be," Josephine replied diplomatically. The mayor beamed. "Excellent, excellent. Now let me show you around your new domain." The schoolhouse consisted of one large room with rows of wooden desks facing a teacher's desk on a slightly raised platform. Bookshelves lined one wall, though they were sparsely filled. A blackboard dominated the front of the room, and large windows allowed natural light to flood the space. A pot-bellied stove in the corner would provide heat during the winter months. "It's perfect," Josephine declared sincerely, already envisioning the room filled with students. "The living quarters are through that door," Mayor Wilson explained, pointing to a door at the rear of the classroom. "Most teachers prefer to live on site, especially during the winter when travel can be difficult. But of course, you're welcome to remain at Mrs. Potter's if you prefer." Curious, Josephine opened the door to find a small but comfortable apartment consisting of a bedroom, a sitting room with a small kitchen area, and a tiny washroom. It was sparsely furnished but clean and well maintained. "This will be ideal," she decided. "When may I move in?" "Immediately, if you wish," the mayor said happily. "School typically begins on Monday, which gives you 3 days to prepare. The previous teacher left her lesson plans and records, though they may need updating." As Mayor Wilson continued his orientation, explaining the school schedule and introducing her to the curriculum expectations, Josephine noticed Deputy Dawson examining the building's windows and doors with a critical eye. "Is something wrong, Deputy?" she asked, when the mayor paused for breath. "Just checking the security," he replied. "Some of these window latches need replacing. I'll have the carpenter come by today." "Surely that's not necessary," Mayor Wilson protested. "Willow Creek is a peaceful town, yesterday's incident notwithstanding." "Better safe than sorry," the deputy insisted, his tone brooking no argument. "A woman living alone should have proper locks." Josephine felt a strange mix of gratitude for his concern and irritation at the implication she needed protection. "I appreciate your thoroughness, Deputy Dawson, but I assure you I'm quite capable of looking after myself." A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I don't doubt that, Miss Vance. But it's my job to ensure the safety of everyone in this town, especially its newest and most valuable citizens." Something in the way he looked at her made Josephine's heart beat a little faster, and she quickly turned her attention back to Mayor Wilson's explanation of the school board's expectations. Later that afternoon, after the mayor had departed and Josephine had begun sorting through the previous teacher's materials, she heard a knock at the schoolhouse door. Deputy Dawson stood on the threshold, accompanied by a gray-haired man carrying a toolbox. "Miss Vance, this is Mr. Jenkins, our local carpenter. He's here to fix those latches." "Please come in," Josephine invited, setting aside the stack of student records she'd been reviewing. While Mr. Jenkins set to work, the deputy wandered around the classroom, examining the sparse collection of books on the shelves. Not much of a library, he commented. No, Josephine agreed. That will be my first project, expanding the available reading materials. Books open worlds to children who may never travel beyond this territory. He nodded thoughtfully. My mother was a great believer in the power of books. She taught me to read before I ever set foot in a schoolhouse. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She was, he said simply, and Josephine understood from his use of the past tense not to pursue that line of conversation further. Instead, she asked, "Have you lived in Willow Creek long, Deputy?" "Most of my life," he replied, running his fingers along the spine of a well-worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. "Left for a few years during the war, then came back and took up the badge when Marshal Hollister needed a deputy." "And do you enjoy being a lawman?" He considered her question seriously. "It's not about enjoyment, it's about duty, keeping order, protecting people who can't protect themselves." His blue eyes met hers. "Not unlike teaching, I imagine." The comparison surprised her. "I hadn't thought of it that way, but perhaps you're right. Both professions serve the community in different ways. And both require patience, fair judgment, and occasional discipline," he added with the hint of a smile. Their conversation was interrupted by Mr. Jenkins announcing that he had finished replacing all the window latches and had installed a sturdy new lock on the back door as well. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," Josephine said gratefully. "What do I owe you for your services?" The carpenter waved away her offer of payment. "Consider it a welcome gift, Miss Vance. Besides, when the deputy asks for something to be done, folks around here tend to accommodate." After the carpenter left, Deputy Dawson lingered, seeming reluctant to depart. "Will you be returning to the boarding house tonight or staying here?" "I think I'll stay at Mrs. Potter's a few more days while I get the living quarters properly arranged," Josephine decided. "But I should head back soon. She mentioned supper is at 6 sharp." "Allow me to walk you," he offered, holding the door open. As they walked back through town in the golden light of late afternoon, Josephine was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk. A few women standing outside the millinery shop whispered behind their hands as the pair passed. "I seem to be causing quite a stir," she murmured. "Small towns thrive on gossip," the deputy replied, seeming untroubled by the attention. "By next week, they'll have found something else to talk about." "Or they'll have decided we're engaged to be married," Josephine said dryly, then immediately regretted her flippant remark when she saw color rise in the deputy's tanned face. "That would be—" he began, then cleared his throat. "Well, as I said, small towns jump to conclusions." They walked in slightly awkward silence for a moment before Josephine asked, "Will you tell me about the children I'll be teaching? It would help to know something about them before Monday." The tension eased as Deputy Dawson began describing the various families in and around Willow Creek, the Cooper twins who were always in mischief. Young Timothy Parker, who had a gift for mathematics. Sally Jenkins, the carpenter's granddaughter, who could already read better than most adults in town. And the Reeves boys from the cattle ranch north of town who were more interested in horses than history. By the time they reached the boarding house, Josephine felt she had a better understanding of the community she would be serving, and a deeper appreciation for the observant deputy, who seemed to know every family's story. "Thank you for your insights, Deputy Dawson," she said sincerely as they paused at the gate. "They'll be invaluable in helping me connect with my students." "Call me Ethan," he said suddenly. "When we're not. That is, when it's not official business." The request surprised her, suggesting a level of familiarity that went beyond professional courtesy. Yet something in his direct blue gaze made it impossible to refuse. "Very well, Ethan," she replied, testing the name. "And you must call me Josephine, at least when there are no impressionable students around to hear such informality." His smile transformed his serious face, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes. "Josephine," he repeated, as if committing it to memory, "I'll see you tomorrow. There's to be a welcome gathering at the church after Sunday services. The whole town will be eager to meet you properly." As she watched him walk away, Josephine realized that despite the inauspicious beginning to her time in Willow Creek, she was looking forward to becoming part of this community and to learning more about its intriguing deputy marshal. The next morning, Josephine donned her finest dress, a forest green creation with delicate lace trim that she had saved for special occasions. She arranged her chestnut hair in a more elaborate style than usual, securing it with her mother's pearl-tipped hairpins. While she told herself that her extra attention to her appearance was simply to make a good impression on her new neighbors, she couldn't deny a flutter of anticipation at the thought of seeing Deputy Ethan again. Mrs. Potter nodded approvingly when Josephine descended the stairs. "You'll have half the unmarried men in town falling at your feet, looking like that." "I hope to command respect, not admiration," Josephine replied primly, though she couldn't help feeling pleased by the compliment. "A woman can inspire both," Mrs. Potter said with a knowing smile. "Shall we walk to church together? It's just 9:30, and services begin at 10. The church was nearly full when they arrived, with families packed into the wooden pews and children fidgeting despite their parents' stern glances. Josephine couldn't help but assess her future students, noting which ones appeared attentive and which seemed likely to present challenges in the classroom. Mrs. Potter led her to a pew near the front, where they were joined by Dr. Green and, to Josephine's surprise, Ethan. He had exchanged his usual attire for a proper suit, though he appeared somewhat uncomfortable in the formal clothing. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Josephine, and he quickly removed his hat. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he greeted her, his voice more formal in the public setting. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you, Deputy Dawson," she replied with equal formality, though she couldn't suppress a small smile at their mutual pretense of distance after yesterday's agreement to use first names. The service was conducted by Reverend Thomas, a kindly older man whose sermon focused on the importance of welcoming strangers and the biblical injunction to show hospitality. Josephine suspected the topic had been chosen with her in mind, especially when the Reverend asked her to stand and be recognized as the town's new teacher. "We are blessed to have Miss Vance join our community," Reverend Thomas announced. "Education is a sacred trust, and we are fortunate to have secured the services of a teacher with such impressive credentials. Miss Vance, we welcome you with open hearts and pledge our support in your important work." Feeling all eyes upon her, Josephine stood and managed a dignified nod. "Thank you, Reverend Thomas. I am honored to serve this community and look forward to getting to know all of you, especially my future students." After the service concluded, the congregation moved to the churchyard where tables had been set up and laden with food. Women bustled about, arranging dishes and pouring lemonade, while men gathered in small groups, discussing cattle prices and the latest territorial politics. Children darted between the adults, playing impromptu games of tag. Josephine soon found herself surrounded by curious townsfolk, all eager to meet the new schoolteacher. Mothers introduced their children, fathers inquired about the curriculum, and everyone seemed to have some advice or opinion about education. "You'll need to be firm with the Reeves boys," advised Mrs. Baker, the blacksmith's wife. "Their father lets them run wild on that ranch of his. Don't let Timothy Parker's gift for numbers allow him to neglect his other studies," cautioned Mr. Wilson, the banker and mayor's brother. "The boy needs to learn proper English if he's ever to make something of himself." "My Sally loves books," Mr. Jenkins told her proudly. "Reads everything she can get her hands on. I hope you'll encourage that." Josephine did her best to remember names and faces, to respond thoughtfully to each concern or suggestion, and to present herself as both competent and approachable. Throughout the gathering, she was aware of Ethan moving through the crowd, maintaining a respectful distance but somehow always within sight. As the afternoon progressed, Josephine found herself seated at a table with several women who were clearly the social leaders of the community. Mrs. Wilson, the mayor's wife, dominated the conversation, with frequent contributions from Mrs. Thomas, the Reverend's wife, and Mrs. Parker, whose husband owned the town's only hotel. "We're planning a harvest dance next month," Mrs. Wilson informed Josephine. "It's our most important social event of the year. Everyone from 20 miles around attends." "It sounds lovely," Josephine replied politely. "You'll need a suitable escort, of course," Mrs. Thomas added with a meaningful glance toward where Dr. Green stood chatting with several men. "Samuel is from a fine Boston family, you know. I believe you might have much in common. Or perhaps Robert Campbell would be a good match," suggested Mrs. Parker. "He owns the largest cattle ranch in the county. A widower, but still quite handsome for a man of 45. Josephine maintained her composure, though she was startled by how quickly these women were attempting to pair her off. "I haven't given much thought to escorts," she demurred. "My focus is on preparing for the school term." "Nonsense," Mrs. Wilson declared. "A young woman like yourself needs social connections. Teaching is all very well, but surely you don't intend to remain a spinster forever." Before Josephine could formulate a response that wouldn't offend these well-meaning but presumptuous women, a deep voice interrupted. "Ladies, I hope you don't mind if I borrow Miss Vance for a moment." Ethan stood behind Josephine's chair, his expression unreadable. "Mayor Wilson wishes to introduce her to some of the school board members who couldn't attend church this morning." Grateful for the rescue, Josephine rose. "If you'll excuse me, ladies." Once they were out of earshot, she murmured, "Thank you. I was beginning to feel like a prize heifer at auction." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I noticed the matchmaking committee was in full force. Is the mayor really looking for me?" "No," Ethan admitted, "but he will be happy to see you nonetheless." As they crossed the churchyard, Ethan asked, "Has anyone shown you around the town properly?" "Beyond the schoolhouse, I mean." "Not yet. I've been focused on preparing for classes. Would you like a tour?" Willow Creek isn't large, but there are a few points of interest worth knowing about. The idea of spending more time in his company was appealing. "I would appreciate that. When would be convenient for you?" "Now, if you're not too tired from all this socializing." Josephine glanced at the gathering, which showed signs of winding down as families with young children began to depart. Now would be perfect. After making their excuses to the mayor and thanking the organizers of the welcome event, Josephine and Ethan set off down the main street. With fewer people about on the Sunday afternoon, the town had a peaceful quality that Josephine found charming. Willow Creek was founded in 1852, Ethan explained as they walked. "Started as a trading post, then grew when silver was discovered in the hills to the north. The boom didn't last long, but by then, ranchers had settled the valley and the town became a center for cattle business." He pointed out buildings of interest: the jail and marshal's office where he worked, the bank that had been the target of the attempted robbery on Josephine's arrival, the newspaper office that produced the Willow Creek Gazette every Wednesday, and various businesses that served the community. "That's Doc Green's practice," he said, indicating a neat building with a separate entrance at the side. "The front office for patients and his living quarters in the back. He came out from Boston 2 years ago, fresh from medical school." Some thought he wouldn't last a winter, but he's proven his worth many times over. He seems very dedicated, Josephine observed, recalling the young doctor's thoughtful manner at breakfast. He is, Ethan agreed, though something in his tone suggested reservation. They continued down the street, past the dressmaker's shop, the barber, and the photography studio. At the far end of town stood a building set slightly apart from the others, with painted windows and the sound of a piano drifting from within. The Silver Spur Saloon, Ethan identified it, his expression hardening slightly. Best avoided by respectable ladies, especially after dark. Josephine raised an eyebrow at his protective tone but didn't comment. Instead, she asked, "Where do you live, Deputy? Or is that too personal a question?" He seemed surprised by her interest. "Not at all. I have a small house just beyond the blacksmith's. Nothing fancy, but it suits me." "And your family? Are they nearby?" A shadow crossed his face. "My parents are gone. Father died in a mining accident when I was 14. Mother passed from fever 5 years later. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Josephine said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his eyes. "We have that in common, then both alone in the world." "Alone, perhaps, but not lonely," he corrected gently. "Not in a place like Willow Creek. People look out for each other here." They had reached the edge of town, where the main street gave way to a dirt road leading out toward distant ranches. A creek, presumably the one that gave the town its name, wound through a small grove of willow trees, creating a peaceful scene in the late afternoon light. "It's beautiful," Josephine murmured, pausing to admire the way the sun glinted off the water. "This was my favorite spot as a boy," Ethan admitted, surprising her with this personal revelation. "I'd come here to fish or just to think. Sometimes to hide from my chores," he added with a hint of mischief that made him seem younger, less burdened by responsibility. "I can see why. There's something magical about water and trees together." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the gentle movement of the willow branches in the breeze. Then Ethan cleared his throat. "We should head back. The sun will be setting soon and Mrs. Potter will be expecting you for supper." As they walked back through town, Josephine found herself wishing the afternoon could last longer. Despite her initial reservations about life in a small frontier town, she was beginning to feel a sense of belonging, and much of that feeling was tied to the man walking beside her. "Thank you for the tour," she said as they approached the boarding house. "And for rescuing me from the matchmaking committee." "My pleasure," he replied, his blue eyes warming with humor. "Though I should warn you they're persistent. By this time next week they'll have you engaged to the most eligible bachelor in the county." "And who might that be?" she asked, unable to resist the flirtatious tone that colored her words. Before he could answer, the boarding house door opened, and Mrs. Potter appeared on the porch. "There you are, Miss Vance. I was beginning to wonder if you'd been kidnapped by Indians." Ethan frowned at the woman's poor attempt at humor. "Miss Vance was simply getting acquainted with the town, Mrs. Potter." "Of course she was," the landlady replied with a knowing smile. "Well, supper's nearly ready. Will you be joining us, Deputy?" He shook his head. "Thank you, no. I have duties to attend to." Turning to Josephine, he added, "Good evening, Miss Vance. I'll stop by the schoolhouse tomorrow to see if you need any assistance with your preparations." As Josephine watched him walk away, Mrs. Potter chuckled softly. "Well, well. It seems our new schoolteacher has caught the eye of our serious deputy." "We're merely acquaintances," Josephine protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Potter replied, clearly unconvinced. "But I've lived in this town for 30 years, and I've never seen Ethan Dawson give anyone a personal tour before." The next morning, Josephine rose early and after a quick breakfast, headed to the schoolhouse. She had much to do before classes began the following day, organizing books and materials, preparing lesson plans for multiple grade levels, and arranging the classroom to create an environment conducive to learning. The schoolhouse was peaceful in the early morning light, and Josephine found herself humming as she worked. She had just finished arranging the desks in neat rows when a knock at the door interrupted her task. Expecting it might be Ethan, she was surprised to find Dr. Green standing on the threshold, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he greeted her with a warm smile. "I thought these might brighten your first day in the schoolhouse." "How thoughtful," Josephine said, accepting the flowers with genuine appreciation. "Please come in. I was just setting up the classroom." The doctor entered, glancing around approvingly. "You've made progress already. The room feels different, more organized." "That's kind of you to say." Josephine found a jar to use as a vase and placed the flowers on her desk. "What brings you by this morning, Doctor, besides your generous gift?" "Samuel, please," he insisted. "And I simply wanted to ensure you were settling in comfortably. First days in a new place can be challenging." "I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing quite well." "Everyone has been very welcoming." Dr. Green nodded, though he seemed to have something else on his mind. After a moment's hesitation, he said, "I also wanted to invite you to dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening, as a proper welcome to Willow Creek." Josephine hesitated, caught off guard by the invitation. While the doctor was certainly pleasant company, she felt no particular attraction to him, and she was conscious of the town's tendency to jump to conclusions about relationships. Before she could formulate a response, another knock sounded at the open door. Ethan stood there, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him, Josephine and the doctor standing close together, wildflowers prominently displayed on the desk. "Deputy, Dr. Green acknowledged with a slight nod. "I was just extending a dinner invitation to Miss Vance." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "Don't let me interrupt," he said stiffly, turning to go. "Actually," Josephine called out quickly, "I was about to explain to Dr. Green that I have too much preparation to do this evening with classes beginning tomorrow. Perhaps another time." The doctor accepted her refusal graciously, though his glance between her and Ethan suggested he understood more than was being said. "Of course, the offer remains open whenever you find yourself with a free evening." With a polite bow to them both, he departed. An awkward silence fell between Josephine and Ethan after the doctor's departure. Finally, Ethan cleared his throat. "I came to see if you needed help moving your belongings from the boarding house. Mrs. Potter mentioned you plan to stay here starting tonight." "That's very considerate, thank you." Josephine busied herself straightening a stack of primers, avoiding his gaze. "I don't have much, just 2 trunks and a few personal items. I can bring the wagon around at noon if that suits you." "Perfectly," she agreed, finally looking up to meet his eyes. What she saw there, a mixture of relief and something warmer, made her heart beat faster. As promised, Ethan arrived with a wagon at midday, and they made quick work of transferring Josephine's possessions from the boarding house to the schoolhouse apartment. Mrs. Potter provided them with a basket of food to tide you over until you can arrange proper groceries. And several other townsfolk stopped by with housewarming gifts, a handmade quilt from Mrs. Jenkins, a set of dishes from the general store owner, and a small bookshelf that Mayor Wilson said had belonged to the previous teacher, but might as well stay with the school. By late afternoon, Josephine's living quarters had taken on a more personal appearance, with her books arranged on the new shelf, her mother's silver-backed hairbrush set on the small dressing table, and her father's portrait placed on the bedside table. "It looks like home already," Ethan observed as he helped her hang a watercolor painting of Boston Harbor, her own work from years ago. "It's starting to feel that way," Josephine admitted, surprised by how quickly she had adapted to her new surroundings. "Thank you for your help today. I couldn't have managed those trunks alone. Happy to be of service." He hesitated, then added, "I should let you finish settling in. I'm sure you have much to do before tomorrow." Josephine nodded, though she found herself reluctant to see him go. "Will I see you at the school opening tomorrow?" "I believe the mayor mentioned some sort of ceremony." "I'll be there," Ethan promised. "The whole town turns out for the first day of school. It's tradition." After he left, Josephine spent the evening finalizing her lesson plans and preparing the classroom for her new students. As darkness fell, she lit the lamps in her small apartment and sat by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Willow Creek was so different from Boston, with its clear air and vast openness. Yet already, she felt a connection to this place and to certain people within it. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the first day of school. Josephine dressed carefully in a navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs, professional, yet approachable, and arranged her hair in a neat chignon. At 7:30, she rang the school bell for the first time, its clear tone echoing through the town. Within the hour, families began arriving, parents escorting younger children, older students coming on their own or in small groups. Mayor Wilson conducted a brief ceremony on the schoolhouse steps, officially introducing Josephine to the community and leading everyone in a prayer for a successful school year. Then, with a sense of anticipation and purpose, Josephine welcomed her students into the classroom. As Ethan had described, there were about 20 children ranging in age from 5 to 16. The younger ones gazed at her with wide, curious eyes, while the older students, particularly the teenage boys, affected an air of indifference that didn't quite hide their interest in the new teacher. "Good morning, students," Josephine began, standing before them with confidence born of experience. "I am Miss Vance, and I am honored to be your teacher. Before we begin our lessons, I'd like each of you to stand, state your name and age, and tell me one thing you hope to learn this year." One by one, the children introduced themselves: the Cooper twins, Sally Jenkins, Timothy Parker, the Reeves boys, and all the others she had heard about. Some spoke clearly and confidently. Others mumbled shyly, but each provided Josephine with valuable insights into their personalities and abilities. The morning passed quickly as Josephine assessed her students' knowledge levels and divided them into appropriate groups for instruction. By noon, when she dismissed them for the lunch hour, she had a clearer understanding of the educational challenges ahead and a growing affection for these frontier children with their mixture of toughness and vulnerability. As the students scattered to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Josephine noticed Ethan approaching on horseback. He dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post before making his way to where she stood on the schoolhouse steps. "How goes the battle, Miss Vance?" he asked, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "Quite well, Deputy Dawson," she replied, matching his formal address. "The children seem eager to learn for the most part. Even the Reeves boys, they tested me as expected," Josephine admitted, "but I believe we've reached an understanding." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Already? I'm impressed. Most teachers take weeks to bring those two in line." "I simply made it clear that while I respect their knowledge of ranching and riding in my classroom, they will respect my knowledge of reading and arithmetic," he chuckled. "Direct approach." "I like it." From the schoolyard came the sound of children's laughter and the thud of a ball being kicked in an impromptu game. Josephine watched them with satisfaction, already feeling protective of these young people entrusted to her care. "I can't stay," Ethan said, following her gaze. Just wanted to check that everything was proceeding smoothly. It is, thank you, though I'm already compiling a list of books and supplies we'll need. The school library is woefully inadequate. Make your list. I'm riding to the county seat next week on official business. I can place orders for you while I'm there. His willingness to help touched her. That would be wonderful. I'll have it ready in a few days. As he turned to leave, Josephine found herself calling after him. Deputy Ethan, would you care to join me for supper this evening? As a thank you for all your assistance. Nothing fancy. I'm afraid Mrs. Potter provided some basic provisions and I'm a passable cook. For a moment, he looked startled by the invitation, then a slow smile spread across his face. I'd be honored, Josephine. What time? 7 o'clock. I'll be there. With a tip of his hat, he mounted his horse and rode away. Throughout the afternoon lessons, Josephine found her thoughts occasionally straying to the evening ahead. It had been impulsive to invite him to supper, perhaps even improper given her position in the community. Yet something about Ethan Dawson drew her in a way no man ever had before. When the school day ended and the children had been dismissed, Josephine hurried to her living quarters to prepare for her guest. She changed from her teaching dress to a simpler gown of soft lavender, let her hair down from its severe style, and set about preparing a meal from the provisions Mrs. Potter had provided: fresh bread, cold chicken, pickled vegetables, and apples for dessert. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Ethan stood on the threshold, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and vest. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, and Josephine felt a flutter of pleasure at the realization. "Good evening," she greeted him, stepping aside to let him enter. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper, a housewarming gift, nothing elaborate. Curious, Josephine unwrapped the package to find a small, leather-bound book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "This is lovely," she exclaimed, genuinely touched by the thoughtful gift. "How did you know I enjoy poetry?" "I noticed you had several volumes in your collection when we were arranging your books," Ethan explained. "The general store doesn't carry much literature, but I remembered seeing this at Parker's Hotel. They keep a small selection for travelers." The fact that he had not only noticed her reading preferences, but gone to the trouble of finding something she might enjoy spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you. This means a great deal to me." They sat down to the simple meal, and conversation flowed easily between them. Ethan told stories of his early days as a deputy, including some of the more humorous incidents that occurred in a small frontier town. Josephine shared anecdotes from her first day of teaching, describing the children's personalities and her plans for their education. "You seem to have a clear vision for the school," Ethan observed as they finished the last of the apples. "Education has always been my passion," Josephine explained, "particularly for girls and young women. In places like this, too often their schooling is considered secondary to their brothers. And yet you teach all the children together. For now, but I hope in time to establish advanced classes for those who show aptitude regardless of gender or family circumstances." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "An admirable goal, though you may face resistance from some quarters." "I'm prepared for that," Josephine said with determination. "Change never comes without opposition." As the evening wore on, they moved from the small dining table to the more comfortable chairs in the sitting area. The conversation shifted to more personal topics: books they had read, places they had visited, dreams they still harbored. "Have you never wanted to leave Willow Creek?" Josephine asked, curious about his attachment to the small town. Ethan considered the question seriously. "I left once during the war, saw enough of the world to know that this is where I belong. There's something to be said for knowing your place in the community, for being part of something smaller but meaningful. I understand that, Josephine admitted. In Boston, I was just one of many teachers. Here, I feel I can make a real difference. You already are, he assured her. The children couldn't stop talking about you when I saw them after school. Even the Reeves boys seemed impressed, though they'd never admit it. The clock on the mantel chimed 9, and Ethan rose reluctantly. I should go. You have another full day tomorrow, and I have early rounds. At the door, he paused, seeming to struggle with what to say. Finally, he simply took her hand and pressed it gently. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Josephine. Thank you for coming, Ethan. She hesitated, then added, Perhaps we could do this again sometime. His smile was answer enough. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Josephine threw herself into her teaching duties, gradually winning the respect and affection of even her most challenging students. Ethan remained a constant presence in her life, finding reasons to stop by the schoolhouse several times a week, sometimes on official business, often simply to see how she was faring. Their friendship deepened through shared meals, long walks by the creek on Sunday afternoons, and occasional evenings reading aloud from favorite books. Though nothing was explicitly stated between them, the town's gossips had plenty to speculate about, particularly when Ethan began escorting Josephine to church each Sunday, a clear signal of his intentions in a community where courtship rituals were well understood. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the promised harvest dance. Despite multiple invitations from various eligible men in the county, including a persistent Dr. Green, Josephine made it clear that she would be attending with Deputy Dawson. The evening of the dance, Josephine dressed with particular care, wearing a gown of deep burgundy silk that had been her mother's, one of the few fine things she had brought from Boston. When Ethan arrived to escort her, his stunned expression upon seeing her was more eloquent than any compliment. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering his arm. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with autumn leaves and harvest fruits decorating the walls, and lanterns casting a warm glow over the assembled townsfolk. A small band played lively tunes, and dancers of all ages filled the floor. As Ethan led Josephine in a waltz, she was conscious of curious eyes watching them, but for once, she didn't mind the attention. Being in his arms felt right, as if she had found something she hadn't known she was seeking. Everyone is staring at us, she murmured as they moved gracefully among the other couples. Let them, Ethan replied, his blue eyes never leaving her face. I'm too busy looking at you to notice. The evening passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and conversation. Josephine was introduced to ranchers and their families from outlying areas, many of whom had children in her school. She found herself genuinely enjoying the simple pleasures of country society, so different from the formal balls of Boston, yet in many ways more authentic and heartfelt. As the hour grew late and the crowd began to thin, Ethan suggested they step outside for some fresh air. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. They walked a short distance from the town hall, finding a quiet spot beneath a large oak tree. Are you cold? Ethan asked, noticing Josephine's slight shiver in the autumn breeze. A little, she admitted. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple but intimate, his hands lingering briefly before he stepped back. Josephine, he began, his voice unusually hesitant. These past weeks, getting to know you, they've meant a great deal to me. Her heart quickened at his tone. They've meant a great deal to me as well. I never expected. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. When I became deputy, I accepted that my duty to this town might not leave room for personal happiness. Then you arrived, and suddenly I found myself wanting things I'd put aside. Josephine took a step closer to him, drawn by the vulnerability in his usually confident demeanor. What things, Ethan? He met her gaze directly, all hesitation gone. A partner, a family, a future that includes more than just upholding the law. The implications of his words hung in the air between them, unspoken yet unmistakable. Josephine felt as though she stood at a crossroads, one path leading back to the independent life she had planned, the other toward something both frightening and exhilarating in its potential. "I came to Willow Creek seeking purpose," she said softly. "I didn't expect to find you." Ethan reached out, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm still deciding," she admitted with a small smile. "But I'm inclined to think it's very good indeed." He stepped closer, his eyes asking a question. When she didn't pull away, he lowered his head slowly, giving her ample time to retreat if she wished. Instead, Josephine tilted her face upward, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss, her first kiss. For a moment, the world seemed to still around them, the sounds of the dance fading into the background. Then, as Ethan's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, the stars above seemed to blur and dance. When they finally parted, Ethan kept her close, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you arrived in town," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Even when I was hiding behind a water trough during a bank robbery." Josephine teased, trying to lighten the moment even as her heart raced at the significance of what had just happened. "Especially then," he replied with a smile. "You were frightened but brave. I admired that immediately." A burst of laughter from the town hall reminded them that they were not truly alone. Reluctantly, Ethan stepped back, though he kept hold of her hand. "We should return before your reputation is completely ruined," he said ruefully. "Small towns have eyes everywhere." "Let them see," Josephine said with newfound boldness. "I'm not ashamed of my feelings for you, Ethan." His expression softened. "Nor I for you, but I respect you too much to give the gossips more fuel than necessary." As they walked back toward the dance, hands still linked, Josephine felt as though she were floating above the ground. Her first kiss, under a canopy of stars with a man who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in his world. It was more romantic than any scenario she had imagined growing up reading novels in Boston. The following days took on a dreamlike quality as Josephine balanced her teaching duties with the blossoming relationship with Ethan. They were discreet, mindful of her position in the community and the example she needed to set for her students. Nevertheless, it was clear to anyone with eyes that the deputy and the schoolteacher had formed a special attachment. November arrived with colder weather and the first dusting of snow. The schoolhouse stove was kept burning throughout the day now, and Josephine found herself grateful for the cozy apartment attached to the classroom. On a particularly blustery Saturday, she was surprised by a knock at her door in the late morning. Ethan stood on the threshold, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. "Good morning," he greeted her, a mysterious smile playing about his lips. "Are you free for an adventure today?" "An adventure?" Josephine echoed, intrigued. "What kind of adventure?" "The kind that requires warm clothing and a sense of wonder," he replied cryptically. "Can you be ready in half an hour?" Unable to resist his boyish enthusiasm, Josephine agreed. She dressed warmly in her heaviest skirt, woolen stockings, and a thick coat, then joined Ethan outside where he waited with a horse-drawn sleigh. "Where did you get this?" she asked, admiring the handsome vehicle with its polished wood and jingle bells. "Borrowed it from the Parkers," Ethan explained, helping her up to the seat and tucking a heavy buffalo robe around her legs. Mr. Parker uses it to transport hotel guests to and from the train station in winter. With a flick of the reins, they were off, the sleigh gliding smoothly over the snow-covered road leading out of town. Josephine couldn't help laughing with delight at the novel experience. She had seen sleighs in Boston, of course, but had rarely had occasion to ride in one. They traveled for about an hour, following the creek upstream into the foothills beyond Willow Creek. The landscape changed as they went, the open valley giving way to gently rolling hills dotted with pine trees. Finally, Ethan guided the horses off the main road and along a narrower track that led to a small clearing beside the creek. In the center of the clearing stood a cabin small but solidly built, with smoke rising from its chimney. "What is this place?" Josephine asked as Ethan helped her down from the sleigh. "My father built it," he explained, a hint of nostalgia in his voice. "Before we moved into town. After he died, Mother couldn't bear to sell it, so we kept it as a retreat. I come up here sometimes when I need solitude or to remember simpler times." The fact that he was sharing something so personal touched Josephine deeply. "Thank you for bringing me here." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A fire burned in the stone fireplace, warming the single room with its wooden furnishings. A table had been set with plates and cups, and a pot bubbled on the small cast-iron stove in the corner. "You planned this," Josephine realized, taking in the preparations that must have been made before he came to fetch her. Ethan smiled sheepishly. "I rode up early this morning to get things ready. I wanted it to be special." "It is," she assured him, removing her coat and gloves. "It's perfect." They shared a simple but delicious meal of venison stew and fresh bread, followed by coffee and apple pie that Ethan admitted had been purchased from Mrs. Potter. As they sat by the fire afterward, Josephine felt a contentment she had rarely experienced, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. "I used to dream of living in a place like this," she confessed, gazing around the rustic cabin. "When I was a girl in Boston, reading adventure stories about the frontier. And now that you're here, does it live up to your expectations?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "It's different than I imagined. Harder in some ways, the physical demands, the isolation, but richer in others, the community, the sense of building something meaningful, and there are unexpected blessings I never could have anticipated." She met his gaze meaningfully. Ethan reached for her hand, his expression growing serious. "Josephine, there's something I need to ask you, something I've been considering for weeks now." Her heart began to race as he moved from his chair to kneel before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Before that, my grandmother's. I know it's not as fine as what ladies wear in Boston, but it's beautiful," Josephine interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. Ethan took a deep breath. "Josephine Vance, I never expected to find someone like you in Willow Creek or anywhere else for that matter. You've brought light and purpose into my life in ways I didn't know were possible. I love you with all my heart, and if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days making you happy." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" Though she had begun to suspect his intentions, particularly given the romantic setting he had arranged, hearing the words spoken aloud still took Josephine's breath away. In the short month since arriving in Willow Creek, her life had transformed completely, and at the center of that transformation stood the man before her, offering her a future she hadn't dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching on the word. Then more firmly, "Yes, Ethan. I will marry you." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Ethan rose and pulled her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Ethan pressed his forehead to hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Christmas," Josephine suggested. "It's only a month away, but I don't want to wait longer than that." "Christmas it is," he agreed readily. "We can be married in the church, with the whole town to witness. Unless you'd prefer something more private." Josephine shook her head. "Willow Creek has become my home and its people my family. I want them all there." They spent the remainder of the afternoon planning their future where they would live, Ethan's house in town, with some renovations to make it more suitable for a family. How Josephine would balance marriage with her teaching duties. She was adamant about continuing her work, and he supported her completely, and their hopes for the years ahead. As the daylight began to fade, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Before leaving the cabin, Ethan took Josephine in his arms once more. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "Your life in Willow Creek will be very different from what you might have had in Boston." "I've never been more certain of anything," Josephine assured him, touching his face gently. "You are my home now, Ethan. Wherever we are together is where I belong." The news of their engagement spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. By Sunday morning, when they arrived at church together with Josephine's ring clearly visible on her hand, congratulations poured in from all sides. The women who had once tried to pair Josephine with various eligible bachelors now claimed credit for the match, while the men clapped Ethan on the back and teased him good-naturedly about finally being caught. Even Dr. Green offered his sincere congratulations, though Josephine thought she detected a hint of regret in his eyes. "He's a good man," the doctor told her quietly. "You've chosen well." The weeks leading up to Christmas were a whirlwind of activity. While continuing her teaching duties, Josephine worked with the town's women to prepare for the wedding. Her simple trousseau was supplemented by gifts from the community handmade linens, kitchen implements, and a beautiful quilt created by a group of women who had each contributed a square. Ethan, meanwhile, set about making his bachelor quarters suitable for a wife. He added a larger kitchen, expanded the bedroom, and built bookshelves to accommodate Josephine's collection. When she expressed concern about living so close to the jail where he worked, he promised to keep his professional duties from intruding on their home life as much as possible. "Though there may be times when duty calls at inconvenient hours," he warned her. "I understand that," Josephine assured him. "I didn't fall in love with you despite your commitment to this town, but partly because of it." Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, with fresh snow blanketing Willow Creek in pristine white. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles that cast a warm glow over the assembled townspeople. Every seat was filled, with latecomers standing at the back, as Reverend Thomas prepared to unite the deputy and the schoolteacher in marriage. Josephine wore a gown of ivory silk, another of her mother's treasures, carefully altered by Mrs. Jenkins to fit the current fashion. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, adorned with a wreath of winter holly berries and small white flowers that the women had somehow managed to find despite the season. As she walked down the aisle on Mayor Wilson's arm, standing in for her deceased father, her eyes remained fixed on Ethan, who waited for her at the altar looking handsome and somewhat awestruck in his best suit. The ceremony was simple but profound, with traditional vows exchanged against the backdrop of Christmas greenery and candlelight. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation nearly lifted the church roof. The celebration continued at the town hall, where tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in the community. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, and through it all, Ethan kept Josephine close, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson," he murmured during a quiet moment as they watched the festivities. "Completely," she assured him, still adjusting to her new name and status. "Though I may need to practice signing Mrs. Josephine Dawson before school resumes in January." "You have all night to practice," he teased, then blushed at his own boldness. As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Ethan led Josephine toward the door. Outside, his sleigh waited, decorated with ribbons and bells for the occasion. "Where are we going?" Josephine asked, though she had a suspicion. "I thought we might spend our wedding night at the cabin," Ethan explained, helping her into the sleigh. "More private than town, and I've made sure it's comfortable, but if you'd prefer to stay here." "The cabin sounds perfect," she assured him, touched by his thoughtfulness. The ride through the snowy night was magical, with stars overhead and the only sounds being the jingle of the sleigh bells and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. When they arrived at the cabin, Josephine found it transformed: fresh linens on the bed, flowers somehow procured despite the winter season, and a fire burning warmly in the hearth. "When did you do all this?" she asked, amazed by the preparations. "I had help," Ethan admitted. "Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Jenkins came up this morning while we were at the church rehearsal. They thought you deserved a proper bridal chamber, even in a rustic cabin." Touched by the community's continued support of their union, Josephine explored the cabin that would serve as their honeymoon retreat for the next few days. Everything had been arranged for their comfort and privacy, from the stocked pantry to the luxurious quilts on the bed. As the night deepened around them, any initial awkwardness dissolved in the depth of their feelings for one another. Ethan proved to be as gentle and considerate a husband as he had been a suitor, and Josephine discovered new dimensions to her love for him as they truly became one. Later, as they lay together beneath the warm quilts, listening to the crackling fire, Ethan traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I could be this happy," he confessed quietly. "After my parents died, I focused on duty, on doing what was right for the town. I didn't allow myself to want more." "And now," Josephine prompted, nestling closer to him, "now I want everything: a life with you, children, a future filled with more than just upholding the law. You've given me permission to dream again, Josephine." "We'll build that dream together," she promised, placing her hand over his heart. "Day by day, year by year." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes drifting past the window to join the blanket already covering the ground. Inside the cabin, the newly wedded couple drifted to sleep in each other's arms, secure in their love and the promise of all the days to come. Spring came to Willow Creek in a rush of green and growing things. The creek that gave the town its name swelled with melting snow from the mountains, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows beyond the settlement. For Josephine, now 4 months into her marriage, the season brought both joy and challenges. Balancing her roles as teacher and wife had proven more complex than she had anticipated. Though Ethan was supportive of her career, the townspeople had varying expectations of a deputy's wife. Some, particularly the older generation, thought she should have resigned her position upon marriage. Others appreciated having an educated, dedicated teacher regardless of her marital status. "Pay them no mind," Ethan advised when Josephine shared her frustrations one evening. "You're doing both jobs admirably, and that's what matters." They had settled into a comfortable routine in their expanded home. Mornings began early with breakfast shared before Josephine walked to the schoolhouse and Ethan made his rounds. Evenings were spent together reading, discussing the day's events, planning for their future. On weekends, they often rode to the cabin, which had become their special retreat from the demands of their public roles. As April turned to May, Josephine began to suspect that their family might be expanding sooner than they had planned. When her suspicions were confirmed by Dr. Green, she waited anxiously for the right moment to share the news with Ethan. The opportunity came on a perfect Sunday afternoon as they walked along the creek bank, enjoying the warm spring sunshine. Wildflowers bloomed in profusion around them, and birds called from the trees overhead. "You remember our first kiss?" Josephine asked, squeezing Ethan's hand as they paused beneath a willow tree. He smiled at the memory. "Under the stars at the harvest dance. How could I forget? You looked so beautiful in that burgundy dress, and I was terrified you might reject me." "As if I could have," she teased, then grew more serious. "That night changed everything for me. I realized I had found not just a home in Willow Creek, but a future I hadn't dared to imagine." Ethan tucked a stray curl behind her ear, a gesture that had become familiar and beloved. "You changed everything for me too. Brought light into places I'd kept dark for too long." Taking a deep breath, Josephine placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "And now our lives will change again. We're going to have a baby, Ethan. In December, a Christmas child." His expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "A baby? You're certain?" Josephine nodded, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Dr. Green confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to find the perfect moment to tell you." Ethan's response was to sweep her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her in a circle that left them both laughing and breathless. When he set her down, his eyes were suspiciously bright with unshed tears. "A family," he said wonderingly. "Our family, Josephine." "The beginning of it, at least," she replied with a smile. "I thought perhaps we might make the cabin our summer home once the baby arrives. Children should have open spaces to explore, don't you think?" Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "My father built that cabin for his family. It seems right that our children should know it too." He placed his hand gently on her abdomen again, as if trying to connect with the tiny life growing within. "I'll build an addition before winter, a proper nursery with windows facing the sunrise." As they walked back toward town, arms around each other's waists, they began planning for this new chapter in their lives. Josephine would continue teaching until November, then take time off for the birth and early months of the baby's life. "The school board will need to find a temporary replacement," she mused. "Perhaps Miss Miller. She was a teacher in her youth before she became the telegraph operator." "She'd be formidable," Ethan agreed with a chuckle. "The children wouldn't dare misbehave." The news of the coming baby spread through Willow Creek with predictable speed, generating excitement and a flood of advice from every quarter. The women of the town immediately began planning quilts and layettes, while the men offered Ethan congratulations tinged with good-natured warnings about sleepless nights to come. As her body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Josephine found herself treasuring the quiet evenings with Ethan more than ever. They would sit on the porch of their home as twilight descended, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, discussing names and dreams for their child. "If it's a boy," Ethan said one night as they watched the stars appear, "perhaps we could name him after your father, James," Josephine murmured, testing the name. "James Dawson. It has a strong sound to it." "And if it's a girl," she considered for a moment, "what was your mother's name?" "Elizabeth," Ethan replied, a note of tenderness in his voice. "But everyone called her Beth." "Elizabeth for a girl, then," Josephine decided. "We could call her Eliza or Beth or Lizzie. She could choose as she grows." The summer passed in a haze of happiness, with occasional challenges that only strengthened their bond. When a group of cattle rustlers threatened the ranches around Willow Creek, Ethan was called away for several tense days, returning exhausted but unharmed. When Josephine developed complications that required bed rest in her 5th month, Ethan rearranged his duties to be home more often, caring for her with tender attention. By autumn, with the baby's arrival drawing nearer, they had transformed their house into a true family home. The nursery was ready, painted a soft yellow and furnished with a cradle Ethan had crafted himself. Books appropriate for young children lined the lower shelves in their sitting room, and toys sent by well-wishers waited to be discovered by small hands. December arrived with heavy snowfall, turning Willow Creek into a winter wonderland reminiscent of their wedding day the previous year. As their first anniversary approached, Josephine felt both excitement and trepidation about the impending birth. "What if I'm not a good mother?" She confessed her fears to Ethan as they lay in bed one night, his hand resting protectively on her rounded belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "You'll be wonderful," he assured her. "Look how you are with your students, patient, kind, but firm when needed. Those are exactly the qualities a child needs in a parent. And you'll be an excellent father," she replied, believing it with all her heart. "You protect what you love with such dedication." On the morning of December 20th, just days before their anniversary, Josephine woke to the unmistakable beginnings of labor. With calm efficiency born of preparation, Ethan sent word to Dr. Green and Mrs. Potter, who had agreed to assist with the birth. Then he returned to Josephine's side, holding her hand through each contraction and murmuring encouragement. The labor progressed steadily throughout the day and into the evening. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the clear winter sky, the pain intensified. Josephine clung to Ethan's strength, drawing courage from his unwavering presence even as Dr. Green and Mrs. Potter managed the medical aspects of the delivery. "You're doing beautifully," Ethan whispered, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "Just a little longer now." With a final, powerful effort, Josephine brought their child into the world. The room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn, and Dr. Green's voice announced, "It's a girl, a healthy, perfect girl." Tears streamed down Ethan's face as the tiny, red-faced infant was placed in Josephine's arms. "Elizabeth," he said softly, touching the dusting of dark hair on the baby's head. "Our Elizabeth." "Our Christmas miracle," Josephine agreed, overwhelmed by the wave of love that washed over her as she gazed at their daughter. "Hello, little one, we've been waiting for you." Later, when Dr. Green and Mrs. Potter had departed and the house was quiet, the new family of 3 settled in the sitting room. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and the Christmas tree they had decorated the previous week sparkled with candles and ornaments. Outside, stars glittered in the winter sky, the same stars that had witnessed Josephine and Ethan's first kiss, their wedding, and now the beginning of a new generation. "Happy anniversary, a few days early," Ethan murmured, kissing Josephine's temple as she nursed their daughter. "I couldn't have imagined a more perfect gift." "Nor could I," Josephine agreed, leaning into his embrace. "1 year ago we promised to build a dream together. Look how beautifully it's unfolding." Elizabeth yawned and nestled closer to her mother, her tiny hand curled around her father's finger. In that perfect moment, with snow falling gently outside and love filling their home, Josephine knew that all the decisions that had led her to Willow Creek, all the courage it had taken to leave behind the familiar world of Boston, had been leading her to this life, this family, this overwhelming joy. "I love you, Ethan Dawson," she whispered. "Thank you for waiting for me, even when you didn't know I was coming." "I would have waited forever," he replied simply, his arms encircling both his wife and his newborn daughter. "Some things are worth any wait." Outside, the stars continued their silent vigil over Willow Creek, witnesses to the enduring love that had begun with a first kiss beneath their eternal light, a love that would continue to grow through all the seasons to come. Epilogue: 5 years later, the schoolyard echoed with children's laughter as Josephine rang the bell signaling the end of the school day. Students poured from the red brick schoolhouse, a new, larger building that had replaced the original wooden structure 2 years earlier. Among the last to emerge was a small girl with dark curls and striking blue eyes, a perfect blend of her parents' features. "Mama," Elizabeth called, running to where Josephine stood. "I wrote my name all by myself today. Teacher said it was the best in the class." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Josephine replied, kneeling to embrace her daughter. Though she still served as headmistress of Willow Creek School, she had hired 2 additional teachers as the town grew, allowing her to balance her educational duties with motherhood. "Where's Papa?" Elizabeth asked, looking around expectantly. "He's meeting us at home," Josephine explained, taking her daughter's hand. "Remember, today is a special day." They walked through town, greeting neighbors along the way. Willow Creek had changed considerably in the 5 years since Josephine had first arrived. The railroad had finally extended a spur line to the town, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. The main street boasted several new businesses, including a photography studio where the Dawson family portrait hung prominently in the window. At their home, expanded again last year to accommodate their growing family, Ethan waited on the porch, holding a squirming toddler in his arms. 2-year-old James had his mother's chestnut hair and his father's determined chin, a combination that hinted at the strong will already evident in his personality. "There are my girls," Ethan called, setting James down to greet his wife and daughter. After 5 years of marriage, the sight of him still made Josephine's heart beat faster. Elizabeth ran to her father, who swept her up in a hug before listening seriously to her account of writing her name. James, not to be outdone, tugged at his mother's skirts until she lifted him into her arms. "Is everything ready?" Josephine asked as they entered the house together. Ethan nodded. "Wagon's packed. We can leave whenever you're ready." Within the hour, the family was traveling the familiar road to the cabin that had become their summer home. What had once been a simple one-room structure was now a comfortable retreat with added bedrooms for the children, a larger kitchen, and a wide porch that overlooked the creek. They spent every summer here, away from the demands of town life, and returned for special occasions throughout the year. This weekend marked the anniversary of Josephine's arrival in Willow Creek. Each year, they celebrated with a family trip to the cabin, a tradition that honored the journey that had brought them together. As they approached the clearing, Elizabeth bounced with excitement. "Can James and I look for wildflowers after supper?" "If you stay within sight of the cabin," Ethan agreed, exchanging a smile with Josephine over their daughter's enthusiasm for nature. The evening passed in comfortable family routine, a simple meal, stories by the fire, and tucking tired children into bed. Later, Ethan and Josephine sat on the porch, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "7 years ago today, I was patrolling the street when the stagecoach arrived," Ethan mused, his arm around Josephine's shoulders. "I had no idea my whole life was about to change. And I was nervously peering out the window, wondering what kind of place I had committed myself to," Josephine recalled. "Then there was gunfire, and I found myself hiding behind a water trough with the most handsome deputy I'd ever seen." Ethan chuckled. "Not exactly the romantic first meeting most couples hope for." "I wouldn't change a moment of it," Josephine said sincerely. "Every step, even the frightening ones, led us here." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the creek's gentle murmur and the occasional call of a night bird. The peace of the moment was profound, a stark contrast to the chaotic day of their first meeting. "Marshall Hollister is retiring next month," Ethan said eventually. "The town council has asked me to take his place." Josephine turned to study his face in the moonlight. "And how do you feel about that?" "Honored, challenged." He hesitated. "Concerned about what it might mean for our family. Being Marshall carries more responsibility, more risk." "It also means you can do more good," Josephine pointed out. "You've earned this, Ethan. The town trusts you, respects you, as do I." He kissed her softly. "Your support means everything to me. Always has, from the moment you agreed to that first supper in your schoolhouse apartment." "I believe I was the one who invited you," she reminded him with a smile. "Best impulse I ever followed." The conversation drifted to other topics: Elizabeth's progress in school, James's growing vocabulary, plans for expanding the town's library, the possibility of another addition to their family in the future. Through it all ran the thread of shared purpose and deep affection that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. As the hour grew late and a chill settled in the air, they rose to go inside. Before they did, Ethan pulled Josephine into his arms beneath the star-filled sky. "Do you remember our first kiss?" he asked, echoing the question she had posed years earlier when telling him about their first child. "Under the stars at the harvest dance," she replied, smiling at the memory. "You held me like you'd been waiting forever." "I had been," he said simply. "Even before I knew you existed, I was waiting for you, Josephine." He brushed his lips against hers. "And every day since has confirmed what I knew that night, that loving you would be the greatest adventure of my life." Their kiss deepened beneath the vast canopy of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and continued to shine upon their journey together. In the cabin behind them, their children slept peacefully, secure in the love that surrounded their family. And in that perfect moment, with the past honored and the future bright with promise, Josephine and Ethan renewed the bond that had begun with a first kiss under the stars, a love story still being written, day by day. Beneath the endless skies of the frontier, they both now called home,